Growing up in a small town, you start to notice the things people pretend are private, while somehow everyone still knows everyone else's business. Our street was calm, lined with aging houses and tall trees that hissed and whispered when the wind rolled through. My family lived in a modest place with a white fence out front, the kind you see in old postcards. But the house next door didn't match the rest of the neighborhood. It was bigger, newer, and kept so clean it looked staged, like it didn't belong. The owner was Mr. Hargrove, a well-off man who lived there with his wife, Mrs. Hargrove, and their 3-year-old daughter, Millie. Mr. Hargrove was off. He wasn't loud or rude, just quiet in a way that made people avoid eye contact. He rarely talked, rarely smiled, and mostly kept to himself. But what really stood out was his obsession with his car. He owned a sleek black sports car, the kind you usually only see in glossy magazines. Every weekend, without fail, he'd be outside polishing it like it was made of gold. He'd spend hours on it, circling the vehicle again and again, making sure every inch shined. Sometimes I watched from my window, trying to understand why a car could matter that much to someone. Mrs. Hargrove was the complete opposite of her husband. She was warm and friendly, the type who waved even if you didn't wave first. If she saw me outside, she'd stop to chat, ask about school, or offer a cookie from whatever she'd been baking. Millie was a cheerful little kid, always giggling, always running around their yard, always playing like she didn't have a care in the world. Seeing them together felt comforting, like a small pocket of warmth in our quiet neighborhood. And then, one day, everything changed. Mrs. Hargrove and Millie disappeared. It was as if they dissolved into thin air. I still remember the day the police came to our door. They asked if we'd seen Mrs. Hargrove or the little girl lately. They told us Mr. Hargrove had reported them missing, saying his wife had left him and taken their daughter with her. My parents were stunned. But there wasn't much we could honestly tell the officers. We hadn't noticed anything unusual. No shouting, no obvious fight, no screaming in the night. And like everyone else, we ended up making the same easy assumption. Maybe she really did leave. Weeks passed, then months. There was no sign of them. The whole town started buzzing with rumors, each one wilder than the last. Some people claimed Mrs. Hargrove ran off with another man. Others whispered something far darker, the kind of rumor people lower their voices for even when they're alone. I tried to push it out of my mind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Every time I saw Mr. Hargrove polishing that car, a chill crept up my spine. It felt wrong, like he was trying to scrub away something that couldn't be cleaned. A few months after Mrs. Hargrove and Millie vanished, something strange happened. My dad was in our garage working on his old pickup when he noticed something through the gap between our properties. Mr. Hargrove's garage door was cracked open, just enough to see inside. And there, barely visible in the dimness, sat Mrs. Hargrove's white SUV. It was coated in dust, like it hadn't moved in a long time. My dad called my mum and me over, and we all stood there staring, not saying much because none of us wanted to admit what we were thinking. If Mrs. Hargrove had run away, why would her car still be here? A few days later, we noticed the SUV was gone. Mr. Hargrove had sold it, or moved it, or gotten rid of it some other way. We didn't know. He didn't say a word to anyone. But after that, his behavior shifted even more. He stopped going outside as often, and when he did, he seemed jumpy. He'd glance around like he expected someone to be watching him. The once spotless yard started to look neglected. Even the sports car, His pride began to collect a thin layer of grime. Then one night something happened that I'll never forget. My parents and I were eating dinner when we heard a loud crash from next door. It wasn't a small sound. It was the kind of noise that makes your stomach tighten before your brain can explain why. My dad grabbed a flashlight and told my mum and me to stay inside. From the window, I watched him cross the yard and knock on Mr. Hargrove's front door. It took a long time for the door to open. When Mr. Hargrove finally answered, he looked pale, almost sick. My dad asked if everything was okay. Mr. Hargrove nodded too quickly and said he'd dropped something. That was it. No apology, no explanation. My dad came back, but he looked unsettled. He told us that when the door opened, he'd seen into the hallway just enough to catch a glimpse of the kitchen. There was a pot on the stove, filled with some kind of liquid he couldn't identify. And next to it, on the counter, was a handgun, just sitting there, like it belonged. My dad couldn't explain why that image bothered him so much. But he said it didn't look like an accident. It looked like preparation. After that night, things seemed to spiral. Mr. Hargrove became even more reclusive. The whispers around town grew louder. Some people were convinced he'd done something terrible to his wife and daughter. But there was never evidence, never proof, just suspicion that sat heavy in the air. I started having nightmares, not about monsters or ghosts, about normal doors and normal kitchens and normal houses with terrible things happening behind them. The idea that something could take place so close to home and life could continue like nothing happened scared me more than any story I'd ever heard. Years have passed since then. I grew up, moved away, tried to bury those memories under distance and time. But every now and then, I think of Mrs. Hargrove and little Millie. I wonder what happened. I wonder where they are. I wonder if they ever found safety. I'll never forget the sight of that dusty white SUV sitting in the garage, or the look on Mr. Hargrove's face when my dad knocked, or the way our town changed in the months that followed, like we all learned the same quiet lesson at the same time. Sometimes, late at night, when the world gets too still, I still feel that chill run down my spine. I'll never know for sure what happened next door, but I've always feared the worst. And wherever they are, I can only hope Mrs. Hargrove and Millie are far away from the man who spent so much time polishing his car. I'd been delivering food for a few months, driving around the city and learning its shortcuts and side streets. Most nights were routine. Pick up the order, follow the GPS, drop it off, move on. Nothing memorable, just work. But one night was different. It was late, well past midnight, when I got an order heading to a part of town I didn't recognize. The GPS pulled me away from the streets I knew and into a neighborhood that felt wrong the moment I entered it. Houses were spaced far apart, and the roads twisted in strange ways, like they'd been drawn by someone who didn't understand how streets are supposed to connect. Each corner I turned seemed to push me deeper into a maze of narrow lanes and dark cut-throughs. Streetlights were rare, and the ones that worked cast long, warped shadows over cracked pavement. The farther I drove, the more uneasy I felt. Then the GPS started acting up. It would tell me to turn, then immediately reroute. I'd follow one instruction, and suddenly the map would act like I was somewhere else, like the streets were shifting while I drove. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, and my stomach felt hollow, in a way that had nothing to do with hunger. Finally, after what felt like an hour, the GPS announced I'd arrived. I slowed down and stared at the house. It sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, tall and narrow, with peeling paint and broken windows. The lawn was overgrown, grass high enough to brush my knees. No porch light, no movement. Nothing that said someone lived there. It looked abandoned. I hesitated with my hand hovering over the gear shift, ready to throw the car into reverse and leave. But I thought about the order, about someone waiting, about how old houses can look worse than they are. So I grabbed the bag and stepped out. The air felt thick, heavy, almost suffocating. The gravel under my shoes sounded too loud in the silence. As I walked toward the porch, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My skin prickled, that cold sweat sensation that makes you want to turn around even when you're trying to act calm. When I reached the porch, I noticed the front door was slightly ajar. It creaked open with the slightest push, revealing a dark hallway that swallowed the light. I could barely see inside. Just blackness stretching forward like a tunnel. "Hello?" I called out, trying to sound normal. No answer. Just my voice echoing back, thin and small. Something in my gut screamed at me to drop the food and get out of there. But I took another step, peering into the darkness. That's when I heard a faint rustling, soft, like something dragging across the ground. I turned my head toward the street. Figures were emerging from the shadows, stepping out from between houses, slipping around corners. They moved silently, almost gliding. My heart started hammering so hard, I could feel it in my throat. The first one stepped into the weak porch light. A person, but their face was covered by a blank white mask, smooth and featureless like porcelain. Then another, and another, all the same mask, all silent. They surrounded me. I backed up until my spine hit the porch railing. My breath came fast and shallow. My mind went frantic, searching for an exit that wasn't there. One of them reached for me. I flinched and dropped the food bag. Their hands were cold, shockingly cold, as they grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the doorway. I fought, but it didn't matter. They were stronger than they looked, and the more I struggled, the tighter their grip became. They didn't speak, not one word. The door slammed shut behind us, and the darkness swallowed everything. I couldn't see, so my other senses took over. I heard soft footsteps moving around me. I felt hands patting my pockets. Someone took my wallet. Someone else took my phone. Then my keys. I tried to shout, but my throat locked up. It was like panic had stolen my voice. All I could feel was dread, pure, suffocating dread. Then they let go. I collapsed to the floor, shaking so hard my teeth clicked. The footsteps faded. A door creaked open and shut again. And then there was nothing but silence. I don't know how long I stayed there, too scared to move. It felt like hours. When I finally forced myself up, my legs barely worked. I found the door, shoved it open, and stumbled out into the night. The street was empty. No masked figures, no movement, no sign of anyone. My car was still there, untouched, like nothing had happened at all. I drove off so fast my tires kicked gravel. The streets twisted again, circling and looping until I finally found a main road. But even when the city lights returned, I couldn't calm down. I'd been robbed of my belongings, sure. But it felt like they'd taken something else too. My sense of safety, my trust that the world makes sense, my belief that a map leads somewhere real. And no matter how far I drove, I knew I wouldn't truly escape the memory of those blank masks and those cold hands pulling me into the dark. Hospitals are quiet at night, almost too quiet. I wasn't a nurse or a doctor, just an orderly, and my shifts always felt like they stretched on forever. Endless white walls, the soft hum of fluorescent lights, distant beeps from machines. After dark, the whole place felt eerie. My only real escape was the basement office, a small, dim room where I spent most slow nights. The office sat near the morgue, something I tried not to focus on, even though it was impossible to forget it was there. It was around midnight when I was sitting in the office with another orderly. We were killing time with small talk and watching the clock creep forward. The air smelled like disinfectant, strong enough to cling to your clothes. The only sounds were the faint buzz of a dying light and the low rumble of the ventilation system. Then we heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate. Not the quick, purposeful steps of medical staff. Both of us looked up toward the open doorway. A man passed by, glancing at us as he walked. Something about his eyes felt wrong, like he was measuring us. He didn't speak, just kept going. A few minutes later, he came back. This time, he stopped in the doorway and stared at us. He looked pale, almost unhealthy. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were neat but outdated, like he'd dressed from another era. He didn't seem like he belonged in a modern hospital. "Do you have access to the morgue?" he asked. His voice was low and rough. I exchanged a look with the other orderly. We assumed he might be from a funeral home. It wasn't common this late, but it wasn't unheard of either. "Yes," I said carefully, already uneasy. The man didn't offer a name, didn't mention a body, didn't give any normal reason. He just stared, too still, too focused. Then he said something that made my stomach turn. "I'll pay you," he said. "Let me in for an hour. I need to be alone with the bodies." For a second, the words didn't even register. Then they did, and the room felt colder. The other orderly and I looked at each other again, this time with pure disbelief. The man's expression didn't change. He didn't seem embarrassed. He looked desperate, like he'd rehearsed this request. My throat went dry. "We can't do that," I said. "It's against policy." His eyes narrowed. His jaw clenched so hard I saw the muscles twitch. For a moment I thought he'd argue, try to bargain, or push past us. But he didn't. He just stared at us with a look that made my skin crawl. Then he turned and walked away. His footsteps echoed down the hallway, fading into the hospital's quiet. We sat in silence, the weight of what just happened settling over us like a heavy blanket. "We need to tell security," I said. The other orderly nodded immediately. Walking upstairs through empty halls made the place feel even more ominous. Shadows stretched in corners. Every doorway looked like it could hide someone. When we reached the security office, the guard on duty listened carefully. The moment we described the man, his expression changed, recognition tightening his face. "Did he say he wanted to be alone in the morgue?" the guard asked. "Yes," I replied, my unease deepening. The guard sighed and shook his head. "He's tried this before," he said. "We've had run-ins with him for months. He always vanishes before we can catch him, but we know he's up to something." Hearing that made my stomach drop again. If he'd done it before. What was he really after? Security said they'd increase patrols. They told us to call immediately if we saw him again. But when I returned to the basement office, the hospital didn't feel the same. It already had a coldness to it at night, but now it felt different, like a place where the darkness didn't just exist. It hid things. Secrets. For the rest of my shift, I couldn't stop replaying the man's pale face and hungry eyes. Even when I finally went home, the unease followed me, stubborn and heavy. I never saw him again, but every time I walked past the morgue after that, I felt the same chill, reminding me how close we came to opening a door that should never have been opened. A few years back, when I was 14, my dad took me hunting in a wooded reserve outside our county. We'd gone before, but that time felt different from the start. The trees seemed closer together, the air heavier, and the quiet felt unnatural, like the forest was holding its breath. We arrived just before sunset and set up near the edge of the woods. My dad always said the best time to hunt was when night settled in, when animals were active and careless. I trusted him, so I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling building in my chest. But once the sun sank and the darkness swallowed the trees, the woods changed. Shadows stretched longer, twisting into shapes that didn't feel random. We walked deeper in. My dad carried his rifle, and I carried the smaller one he'd given me for my birthday. The metal felt cold in my hands. The deeper we went, the thicker the trees became, blocking out the moonlight. Soon, the only light came from our flashlights. Every now and then, my dad would crouch to inspect tracks, listening for movement. But that night, we didn't hear anything. No rustling, no snapping twigs, no distant animal calls. It was like the forest had gone still. After a long walk, my legs started to ache, and my dad suggested we rest. We found a small clearing and sat on a fallen log. The silence was so intense I could hear my own heartbeat. My dad whispered something about patience, about waiting for the right moment. I barely heard him. I was too focused on the darkness around us. Then we heard it. Not a normal sound. A low growl, deep and guttural. My heart jumped. I looked at my dad. His face had gone pale. He lifted his rifle slowly and motioned for me to do the same. The growl came again, closer. It vibrated through the trees like something big was circling us. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. My hands started shaking around the grip of my rifle. My dad stood, eyes scanning the tree line. Then, from the shadows, something stepped forward. It was tall, too tall. Its body hunched, but it still stood higher than any animal I'd ever seen. It moved with a slow confidence, like it knew we were trapped. In the weak flashlight glow, its outline looked wrong, wolf-like, but heavier, stretched in a way that didn't match reality. Its eyes caught the light and glowed faintly. The growl became a snarl. I saw teeth, sharp, glinting. My dad whispered for me to stay still, but my legs felt like they might collapse. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe right. My dad raised his rifle and aimed, but he didn't fire. It wasn't hesitation like fear of missing. It was something else, like he understood, deep down, that shooting wouldn't fix what we were facing. The creature started circling us. Every time I thought it had vanished, those glowing eyes would reappear from another angle, watching, waiting. Then it let out a howl, long and bone-chilling, loud enough it seemed to shake the trees. My dad grabbed my arm and yanked me up. We ran. Branches whipped my arms. My lungs burned. I could hear my dad behind me, and behind him, the heavy movement and growls that told me it was following. The forest turned into a blur of darkness and trunks. We didn't care where we went, only that we got away. But the more we ran, the more lost we became. Trails disappeared. Every direction looked the same. Eventually we stopped, gasping, shaking. The growling had stopped, but the silence afterward felt worse, like the forest was listening again. "We need to keep moving," my dad whispered. We wandered for what felt like forever, jumping at every noise, flinching at every shadow. My flashlight started to die, the beam weakening little by little, and the thought of being stuck out there in total darkness made my stomach twist. Then we stumbled onto a narrow path I recognized. My dad exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for hours. We followed it until we finally reached the truck. When we climbed inside, I felt a weight lift off me. My dad started the engine, and we drove away without speaking. The trees faded into the distance, but the feeling didn't fade with them. We made it out, but even now, I can't shake the certainty that we weren't alone in those woods that night, and that whatever stepped out of the darkness had been watching us long before we ever heard it. I've been working the night shift at a gas station on the edge of town for about a year. It's far enough out that we don't get much traffic late, which usually means the job is quiet. Most nights I sit behind the counter, ring up the occasional customer, and watch the clock crawl toward morning. The night it happened started like any other. It was around 2:30 in the morning. The store was empty, the parking lot washed in harsh light that threw long shadows onto the pavement. Inside, the only sound was the low hum of the air conditioner. I was counting cash from the register, stacking bills carefully like my manager always insisted. "Be careful at night," she'd warn. "You never know who's going to walk through that door." I thought I had everything under control. Then the front door slammed open so hard it made me jump. A man stormed inside. Dirty clothes, wild eyes, the kind of smell that tells you someone hasn't had a real shower in a long time. He didn't say a word, just locked onto the cash in my hands. For a second, everything slowed down. My body froze, the way people freeze right before something bad happens. Then he lunged and snatched the money. 1 second I had it. The next it was gone, and he was already moving for the door. That's when something in me snapped into action. I don't know if it was pride or adrenaline or just pure shock, but I jumped from behind the counter and ran after him, shouting for him to stop. He stumbled into the parking lot, unsteady on his feet. He didn't look fast, just desperate. I could see bills sticking out of his jacket pocket as he tried to get away. "Stop!" I yelled again. He turned, panic in his eyes, and tried to run faster, but his body wasn't cooperating. I closed the distance and grabbed his arm. We wrestled for a moment. He fought like a cornered animal, twisting and yanking, and I almost lost my grip. He broke free and started running again, but he wasn't getting far. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and dialed emergency services. I described the man and my location as best I could, breath coming too fast. They told me officers were on the way. I kept following him at a distance, trying not to corner him, because once the adrenaline settled, the fear started creeping in, the realization that a desperate man might do something worse if he felt trapped. After a few minutes, I heard sirens. He heard them too. He stopped dead, his whole body stiffening. For a second, he looked like he might bolt into the darkness. But the flashing lights rolled in fast, and there was nowhere left to go. 2 officers jumped out, ordering him to the ground. He hesitated, then dropped to his knees and put his hands behind his head. They cuffed him quickly. 1 officer came over to me for details, and I explained what happened, still breathing hard, hands still trembling. They searched the man and found the money stuffed in his jacket. One of the officers said the man was homeless and likely high, desperate, erratic, not thinking clearly. I watched as they led him to the squad car. Part of me felt sorry for him, because life had clearly crushed him down to nothing. But another part of me felt sick, thinking how easily it could have gone worse. When the police left, I went back inside the store. The same bright lights, the same empty aisles, but the place felt different now, like it had been marked. My shift was almost over, but I wasn't watching the clock anymore. I kept staring at the front door, half expecting it to slam open again. The rest of the night stayed quiet, but as I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about how thin the line was between uneventful and disaster. That night, I got lucky, and I never forgot it. The road stretched ahead, dark and winding as we drove through the forest. It was supposed to be a weekend escape, just me, Liam, and our friends Morgan and Caleb, heading out for a camping trip. The semester had been brutal. We needed air, distance, something that didn't involve deadlines. We were laughing, the radio playing songs we all knew by heart, when the road suddenly bent sharper than expected. Liam swerved. The tires slid on wet pavement. Everything spun, screeching, glass, the sickening feeling of losing control. We crashed into the trees. I heard Morgan scream. Then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, we were outside the car. The vehicle was crumpled against a tree, the front end smashed in, steam curling up from the hood. I felt strange, like the world was muffled, like I was hearing everything through water. Morgan stood near me, her face pale. Caleb stared at the wreckage without moving. "Is everyone okay?" I asked. My voice sounded flat. "Wrong." Morgan nodded slowly, but she wouldn't look at me. Caleb didn't answer at all. Then I followed his gaze. Inside the car, still strapped into the seats, were our bodies. I blinked, trying to force my brain to correct what I was seeing. But it didn't change. There I was in the passenger seat, slumped forward, blood running from my forehead. Liam was still gripping the steering wheel, his face twisted. Morgan and Caleb were in the back, limp and grey-looking. We were standing outside. Morgan finally whispered, "We're here. But we're still in there." I stepped closer and reached toward the car, and my hand passed right through the metal. That's when panic hit like a wave. "Are we dead?" Caleb asked, his voice shaking. I couldn't answer. The thought was too big, too impossible. But what else explained it? The forest seemed darker now, like the trees were leaning in. The air felt thick, not with fog, but with something I couldn't name. A pressure, a presence. I tried to walk away from the wreck, but my feet felt heavy, like the ground wanted to hold me there. "We have to get out of here," I said, trying to sound brave, but my voice cracked. "We have to. There has to be something." But where could we go? We were deep in the woods. No houses, no lights, no help. Time passed in a blur. I don't know how long we stood there, staring at ourselves, trapped between the wreck and the dark trees. Every sound, a rustle, a snap, made my heart race. It felt like the forest was whispering, telling us we didn't belong. Then I started feeling dizzy, like I was being pulled downward into something deep and cold. My vision blurred, sounds faded. I heard Morgan crying, saw Caleb's terrified face, but it all seemed far away. Then everything went black again. When I opened my eyes, bright hospital lights stabbed at me. Machines beeped around the room. My body felt heavy, sore, bandaged. I turned my head slowly. Liam was in the bed beside me, eyes half open. Morgan and Caleb were in the room too, hooked up to monitors, wrapped in gauze. "We're alive," I whispered. A nurse came in, checking vitals, speaking gently. She said we'd been unconscious for a couple of days, but we're out of danger now. My mind struggled to accept it. What we experienced felt too real to be a dream. It wasn't fuzzy like sleep. It was sharp, detailed, cold. I looked at Morgan. She met my eyes, and I could tell she remembered it too. Caleb sat silently, face pale, but there was relief there, mixed with something else. We survived, and I tried to tell myself the nightmare was over. But even now I still remember that dark forest and the feeling of standing outside myself, like something had opened a door for a moment and then closed it again. After a long, exhausting shift delivering pizzas during a heat wave, all I wanted was to finish my last drop-off and go home. My shirt stuck to my back. My hair was damp. My legs felt like they might give out. The sun had set, but the heat still hung in the air, thick and stubborn, like a blanket you couldn't kick off. And to make it worse, I desperately needed to use the bathroom. I checked the address again as I pulled up. The house was dark. No lights inside, none outside. It looked like it hadn't been cared for in years. Dirty windows, peeling paint, overgrown lawn. I parked, grabbed the pizza box, and tried to convince myself it was nothing. But the place felt abandoned, like time had forgotten it. The street was silent in a way that didn't feel normal. No traffic, no voices, not even the usual night sounds. I rang the doorbell. Nothing. I rang again. Still nothing. I called the number on the order. After a few rings, a woman answered, breathless and apologetic. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I'm on my way. Please, just wait a few minutes." Her voice shook, like she was trying not to cry, or trying not to be heard. Even through the phone, I felt something off. "Okay," I said, forcing my voice steady. "I'll wait." But my bladder was screaming at me, and I couldn't hold it anymore. Near the front of the house was a large bush, thick with leaves, dark enough to offer privacy. I looked around once, no one on the street, then stepped toward it. Relief washed over me as I finally let go. Then the bush rustled, right in front of me. I froze mid-motion, stumbled back, and zipped up fast, heart leaping into my throat. In the dim light, I saw a figure crouched low inside the bush, someone hiding, their face swallowed by shadows. For one horrifying second, my brain couldn't process it. I had just peed on a man. He exploded out of the bush and sprinted away without a sound, running like his life depended on it. He didn't look back. He vanished into the darkness between houses. I stood there shaking, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. Then something caught my eye near the bush, a faint metallic glint. I stepped closer, hands trembling, and spotted a worn backpack half hidden in the leaves. I picked it up and opened it. My stomach dropped. Inside were duct tape, a serrated knife, and a length of rope. I backed away like the bag was poisonous. This wasn't some random backpack. This was the kind of thing someone carries when they're planning something terrible. My fingers fumbled as I called emergency services. I told them everything. The house, the man in the bush, the bag, the customer who claimed she was on her way. It felt like forever before sirens finally echoed closer. While I waited, I kept scanning the shadows, expecting the man to come back. My whole body felt wired, like one wrong sound would make me bolt. Then I saw her. A woman hurried down the street, glancing over her shoulder every few seconds. She looked pale, eyes wide with fear. When she spotted me, she broke into a run. "You have to help me," she said, voice trembling. "He's after me. My ex. He's dangerous." That was all I needed to hear. "Get in," I said, guiding her toward my car. "We'll wait for the police here." She climbed into the passenger seat, crying. I locked the doors immediately. Minutes dragged, but finally police cars flooded the street with flashing lights. Officers searched the area, but the man was gone. All that remained was the bag. The woman gave her statement. Police reassured her, telling her they'd do everything they could to find him. When it was over, I drove home with my hands still shaking on the wheel. I couldn't stop picturing that crouched figure in the bush, the tools in the backpack, the woman's terrified face. I kept thinking about one awful truth. If I hadn't been there, if I hadn't needed the bathroom at that exact moment, something might have happened that night that she wouldn't have survived, and that thought stayed with me.